There's a lot of very practical information in your presentation around guidance on reporting and some practical aspects around market surveillance as well. I'm conscious we are receiving quite a number of questions in the chat, and just while people might have a chance to look through that, I might just start with a question for each of the presenters just to kickstart, and I might start with you, James. And I guess there have been some questions around adaptable devices and patient matched devices, and this is a question relating to that kind of theme. Can I ask you to clarify on whether the use of devices such as splinting materials such as plaster of Paris by professional users in a hospital, do they qualify as custom-made devices, and would they result in the healthcare institution being viewed as the legal manufacturer?
Thanks, Dikla. Yeah, so straight off the bat, when we're talking about plaster of Paris or splinting materials, these types of products or devices, they're going to be mass produced or batch produced. They're not going to be made in accordance with a written prescription from a healthcare professional, and they wouldn't have very specific design characteristics, and these would constitute the criteria for meeting the definition of a custom-made device. So again, they wouldn't be manufactured in that way, so they wouldn't meet the definition of a custom-made device. So in that regard, no, the health institution in that context wouldn't meet the definition of a custom-made device manufacturer.
Great, thanks, James. And just maybe as a follow-on question to that that's come in on the chat, it's around whether if you take a stock product such as an ankle or ankle foot orthosis that's cut to fit and a pad added, I guess the question is whether this would qualify as a custom-made device, or I'm not quite sure if they're asking specifically about the quality management system principles, but let's just take the question on whether it qualifies as a custom-made device.
Yeah, so thanks for that, and thanks for the question. Again, just taking it on the basis of the device there, and if there is kind of additional information that applies to this question, certainly encourage you to go to the MS forums and provide additional information on it. But again, taking it with regards to the device, an off-the-shelf orthotic like that, again, they'd be mass produced or batch produced. They wouldn't be made for the specific needs of one individual patient. So again, it's unlikely that a product in that scenario would meet the definition of a custom-made device. However, if it is a CE mark device, then of course MDR requirements for CE mark devices as applicable, they would apply. And in that scenario, for example, quality management system requirements would apply. But again, if we're missing anything from that question, please do provide it in the MS forums, and we'll be happy to get back to you if we can.
Thanks, James. Niamh, I might come to you next. Just in relation to your presentation, you outlined some of the high-level detail contained within Annex 1 for demonstrating safety and performance of custom-made medical devices. Can I ask you what your key message would be to participants online today in terms of applying the Annex 1 requirements?
Yeah, sure. I guess what I outlined in the slides is really just to signpost some of the key requirements that CMD manufacturers should consider. I guess my key message is to familiarise yourself with the detail within Annex 1 and the requirements of the MDR as it relates to CMD manufacturing. Make sure to identify any relevant requirements for your specific device, identify available resources in terms of guidance available, and put a plan in place for meeting the requirements.
Thanks, Niamh. And another question related to your area within the webinar today is linked to the obligations for other economic operators. There have been a couple of questions around this particular theme, asking what are the obligations for authorised reps regarding custom-made devices and obligations for other economic operator roles, so importers, distributors, and I guess I know we do have some information in previous webinars that we can post the link in the chat that would be useful to revisit, but I might just hand over to you there just to answer that.
Yeah, sure. I guess I highlighted in the presentation the authorised rep. I mean, this occurs when the manufacturer is based outside of the EU, and Article 11 really outlines in specific details the requirements for the authorised rep. I mean, you're looking at maintaining technical documentation, registration requirements, informing the manufacturer about complaints and incidents, and cooperating with competent authorities on behalf of the manufacturer when incidents arrive in the EU. More of these details are outlined in Article 11, and in terms of then, say, the likes of importers and distributors, they have their own specific articles within the regulations. Article 13 outlines the obligations for importers, and Article 14 outlines the obligations for distributors. This includes the likes of, I highlighted because I previously mentioned registration details. Importers must register on EUDAMED, assess the labelling of the devices. Distributors must register on a national basis, depending on where they are based. Distributors in Ireland must register with us. And as Nicola mentioned, I mean, we did do a webinar series in 2020 looking at the implementation of MDR and IVDR, and there is a specific economic operator obligations presentation on those, and we can post the link in here in the chat so people can go. They're on our YouTube channel and you can follow up there. And I guess in addition, just in terms of distributors, we do HPRA have a guidance document as well for distributors in Ireland.
Thanks, Niamh. I think, yeah, some of the key verification checks for distributors and importers it's important to be following those, that the device is CE marked, that the information on the instructions for use accompanies the device, and that in the case of importers, that they've complied with the registration requirements, as Niamh said. And I guess really important to maintain a database of complaints as well, and to be able to feed that back in to the manufacturer and to feed into the vigilance system there as well on that piece. Thanks, Niamh. I might come to you next, Jenny, if that's okay. I guess in your slides you've called out some key practical aspects of demonstrating conformity with the MDR, and many people online here today may in the future be lucky enough to meet you in person during an inspection. So I guess really, can I ask you to outline what they can expect in terms of the inspection process and what happens on the inspection?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I suppose from end to end, the inspection commences with an opening meeting. During that, we'd outline the scope of the inspection, talk to them about how things are going to work and things like that. And then it ends with a closing meeting. In between the team, the number depends on, I suppose, the scale of the organization and I suppose the risk of the issues that we're going to investigate. But we'll use interviews, like I said during the presentation. We'll review procedures and records. We'll tour the facility. We'll observe activities being carried out, such as manufacturing, all to aid in kind of measuring whether the company and the company's system and the company's device are all compliant or not. We take notes throughout the inspection. We also ask for copies of documentation, either hard copy or soft copy through an electronic system, all to be kept as evidence as needed. In some situations, the team may also request samples of devices and potentially device packaging. That mightn't be so relevant in the case of custom-made devices because they're one-offs, but if there were prototypes, for example, we may need to take samples if the event arose. But this is very rare, as I said.
Thanks, Jenny. That's great. And I guess just maybe a follow-on question that's come in the chat about it's related to how to create a design file, and the question is whether they must complete a design file per patient specification. Would you be happy to take that question?
Yeah, sure. So no, I think this is a common misinterpretation in this sector, where you think you have to have all of the technical documentation for every single product, but in reality, one central set of documentation that describes the materials being used, the methods being used, the equipment being used, one central set that is core to all of your different processes is generally sufficient. And the only variable part then is what you're actually doing to customize the individual devices being manufactured. So what you're doing to meet the prescription that's being provided by the authorized person. I don't know, is that detailed enough, or do you want some more than that?
That'll do me for now anyway. And I guess if the person who's asked the question needs more information, please you can drop us an email or fill in that MS Forms, and we can address it outside of the webinar. Thanks, Jenny. I might give you a break now and hand over to Ivana. Ivana, just I guess in your slides you provided us with an update on complaint and incident report handling. You've outlined how UDEMED is used for reporting of field safety corrective actions and incidents, but until UDEMED is fully functional, can you remind participants today how they as custom-made device manufacturers can meet the obligation to report serious incidents, and to whom do they report?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I did cover it briefly on my slides. So while UDEMED has yet to go live, it's still in development, and we at this stage don't have a working version. So there is guidance that has been released that would allow you to have an alternative process until then. So under the current process, you would have to submit to the competent authorities through an email address. So that's the process that's in place at the moment. For the HPRA, we have our devicesafety@hpra email address that we receive our incidents and FSCA reports in on.
Thanks, Savannah. Oh. Apologies, a bit of a delay there just when I was trying to mute and unmute. I'm conscious there's also a question there in terms of demonstrating equivalence for a custom-made device. I guess just very briefly, the MDR outlines how equivalence is demonstrated, and these requirements must be applied to custom-made devices. I guess it's important to recognise that this would be difficult to do for a custom-made device in terms of, having access to the available data, and also, I suppose there is a number of guidance documents available on the MDCG website that will address and give some guidance around the equivalence piece that may be of use to people, and we can, provide that further guidance if you contact us on the MS Forums later. Just in terms of another couple of questions in the Q&A, if you just bear with me for a second. I also saw there was a question related to the difference between EU and UK custom-made device manufacturers. And I suppose, given in Ireland, we're following the European requirements where it's very much specified out in the MDR, and I guess since Brexit, obviously the UK competent authority and the UK government is introducing their own, I suppose, legislation. It does generally mirror the MDR, but really I'd have to advise you to go to the MHRA website to try and familiarize yourself with those requirements. I wouldn't be able to specify exactly what those UK requirements are, but certainly anything relating to the EU market, happy to provide guidance in relation to that. In terms of any other questions that are coming through in the chat, there is something about prescribers, I think. James, would you be happy to take this? The question is, do prescribers of Class 1 devices have to fulfill certain criteria? As a prescriber, do I register with UDEMED?
Yeah, so firstly, just with regards to that question, I think there was a mention that it could be a stock product as well. So just on that basis as well, if it's a stock product, it's unlikely to meet the definition of a custom-made medical device, and in that scenario, a prescription may not necessarily be required for that. So that's just one point to consider with regards to that. Secondly, I might add that I suppose we don't regulate clinical practice, and the MDR doesn't set out specific obligations with regards to clinical practice. So it doesn't set out specific obligations for prescribers, for example. There is not an obligation for prescribers to register on Eudamed. With regard to prescriptions, and as I mentioned in one of my slides, one of the really important points to note on this topic is that it's really important to consider the scope or the code of your professional practice and what that authorizes you to do, or what that authorizes you to prescribe within the scope of that code. So, for example, as I mentioned, in Ireland, of course, you have medical doctors, you have dentists who are authorized to prescribe within that code. There is product-specific prescribing criteria for, I believe it's health and social care professions, which be regulated by CORU. So if you're a member, or if you're a member of CORU or one of those professions that are regulated by CORU, I would certainly encourage you to follow up with them to seek additional guidance regarding what you're authorized to prescribe for on a product-specific basis. So I hope that answers the question relatively clearly.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Yeah, appreciate that. I guess I'm just having a quick look down through the Q&A. Is the manufacturer required to notify? Is the manufacturer required to notify a notified body about the change in critical supplier of custom-made devices? I'm just thinking, Jenny, not to put you on the spot, would you be happy to take that question, kind of related to the
Yeah, sure, no problem. So generally, if you have a notified body for your custom-made device, we're talking class 3 implantable, and you would have within your agreement with the notified body what elements or changes you must, I suppose, inform them of. Usually critical suppliers or changes to, or significant changes to the quality management system would have to be reported. So I think, yeah, if a critical supplier, they're generally listed either on or accompanying on an appendix, the certificate that's supplied by your notified body. So usually you would, if you have to change your critical supplier of some, really significant element of your device, then yes, you would inform the notified body. But for I suppose the individual answer, you would consult with your notified body and ask them, do they want to know about this? And if they don't, they'll tell you very quickly. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. I think that's clear. Great. I guess in terms of the questions, I'm conscious of the time and how we are meeting, coming to the end of the webinar session, and I think maybe just for one final question, I might put this to James, and it's linked to the question around authorised prescription again. It's, what does the HPRA do if we identify a custom-made device that has been manufactured without an authorised prescription? Would you be happy to take that? Thanks.
Of course, yeah, no, thanks, Nicola. So firstly, I guess we, or the HPRA, we're responsible for ensuring the compliance of the medical device. So therefore, in the course of our inspection or market surveillance activities, we will check that a custom-made device has been manufactured in accordance with a valid prescription, as I mentioned in some of my previous slides. So if the prescription is not made out by an authorized prescriber in accordance with national law, then there will be a finding first for the manufacturer who has manufactured a device that is not in accordance with a valid prescription. And secondly, the person who prescribed the device will need to also be cited, and that follow-up would be via a referral by the HPRA or us to a relevant professional body based on the specifics of that case and the associated risk.
Great. Thanks, James, for that. And I don't see any more new questions there. I'm conscious we're coming close to 6 o'clock. It's been a long afternoon for many of you. I think from my side, I'd like to just sum up the webinar by thanking everyone for their participation, for dialing in today, late in the afternoon, for your participation in terms of the questions you've posed. I'd encourage you to please complete the MS forms with any to provide us some insight into what kind of guidance you need, or whether this webinar met your expectations, so that we can tailor that feedback, take it on board, and tailor any future events or communications accordingly. And I would also like to just reiterate that this production will be published on our website in due course over the coming days. I just would like to thank all of the presenters today as well, and everyone behind the scenes who has prepped the production, our corporate affairs team and colleagues within the device department in preparing for today. And I hope you found it of benefit, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.